Welcome to The Art of Plenty. I'm Amy McInnes, and today we are diving into reaction versus action. This is something that applies to so many different facets of life. It applies to work, it applies to relationships, it applies to personal development, it applies to every area of our life, because there are always times where we can react to things when we should be acting rather than coming into a situation and just responding rather than actually thinking about how we want to respond and being intentional about our actions. So let me give you a real life example of how I have been reacting lately rather than acting. I've been bulk recording some of my podcast episodes to get ready to go away. So I know I'm going to be away for a while. So I have some intention to plan to do my episodes. So that's me acting. I'm making a plan. I'm being intentional about what I'm going to do. But here's what's been happening. And if you watch my episodes on YouTube, you have probably noticed over the last couple of episodes there has been some choppiness in the video. So I use a one video setup for those of you who are listening in on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. I use a one camera setup. And what's been happening when I've been recording is that sometimes the video just cuts out and the screen goes completely black. And how I've been reacting to it is, as soon as it happens, I reach out and touch my computer to try to figure out what's going on and kind of waiting for the camera to kick back in. And so in the episodes that have been recorded in post-production, we've been chopping them down. I mean, thank goodness for the editor who's been so patient with us, but we've been chopping them down to make it smooth because the audio continues to be running the whole time, even if the camera cuts out. So I'm reacting because I'm trying to fix this, and I'm not really good at technology, let's put it that way. And so when this situation has come up, rather than fixing it or trying to fix it, I'm just pausing when I notice that the screen goes black, or I'm slowing down what I'm saying so that it's easier to chop. I'm not actually fixing the problem. I'm just putting a Band-Aid on it. And then I step back. I'm like, okay, what can I do to figure it out? And I'm rigging some things and I'm troubleshooting to try to solve this problem. But I haven't actually spent the time to make a plan to figure out what is going on, why is this happening, and how can I fix it in the long term so that the episodes improve. I was kind of honestly just hoping it was going to go away and that it was not really a problem. It was just some kind of weird glitchy thing that happened to be happening one day. And so an example of a reaction is when that screen goes black, I reach out and I touch the computer to try to get things to come back on, and I pause. Rather than an action would be to actually stop recording and start troubleshooting and see if I can solve the problem and not really continue on my agenda of recording these episodes until I have the situation fixed. Here's the deal about reacting rather than acting. Oftentimes, reaction is more emotional, it's more immediate, and it has less control. Whereas action is typically more thoughtful, more intentional, and measured, and there is a control aspect to it. There is a place for being able to react because there are situations where we cannot plan for and that we don't know are going to happen. So our ability to be able to think quickly on our feet and react serves us well, and it serves us well in a lot of situations. But when we get into a cycle where we simply react all the time and we don't act, we can get locked into that, and therefore we're not able to move in the direction that we want to go because we kind of get going around and around in the same situation. Now, that is more likely to happen. You're more likely to be reactive rather than intentionally act when you're under stress, when there's a situation of a lot of pressure, which is exactly what's happening for me because I'm trying to get these episodes recorded and get a bunch of stuff organized because I have quite a bit on my plate this week. So that situation of pressure is making me feel like I don't actually have the time to be intentional in my actions and spend the time to figure out what the problem is. But here's the deal. If I actually spent the time to figure out what was going on with the equipment, would I not be saving time in the long run? And I can't necessarily answer that, but in the long run, I don't want to have choppy YouTube episodes of my podcast where the video is cutting out. That is not a long-term goal. And even though it's what's happening right now, that isn't the solution. So the sooner that I figure this out, the less pressure I have and disappointment I have in connection to the episode. So it actually frees up emotional bandwidth for me, but it also sets me up for the direction that I want to go. But the longer I stay in this reaction circle, the harder it is to break out and spend the time. And if I wasn't under so much pressure right now, and it's pressure that I'm putting on myself to some degree, because I'm trying to get stuff done for our family, and I probably procrastinated just a little bit too much last week, I wouldn't be in such a situation of pressure that I've created. And we don't always have the opportunity to be intentional with our actions, but when we do, we are better served. So how do you improve that? How do you improve your ability to be intentional and act rather than react? And there are some situations that you're more likely to react from. So take a moment and think, is there a situation or a type of circumstance where I am, as a person, am more likely to react rather than act? So for some of us, it could be that it's really easy to react when our kids are tired and emotional. The end of the day and work is done and you've kind of just got dinner on the table and you're trying to get everything cleaned up and there's a lot going on and the house is busy and you're at your wit's end because you've been going all day and you're tired and your kids are making a mess instead of getting organized for bed. And they do something that you don't like and the response is a reaction rather than an action. And it may seem like we're splitting hairs, but what I'm talking about is you react in a way that in hindsight, so when you move forward into the future and you look back at your reaction, you're maybe not pleased with how you handled the situation. Whereas an action, you're going into the situation knowing this is how I want to handle it. And even though in the future you may look back and be like, oh, I could have done this a little bit different, it still feels okay because you were deliberate about it. So take a moment to just think to yourself, is there a type of situation where I fall into this or where this happens to me a lot? Another example of where you may be more reactionary rather than intentional in your action could be at work. For example, when you've got something on your desk that you need to take care of and it's sitting there and you know that you need to invest energy into that because when you invest energy into it, it's going to set you up for the next season of your work, or it's going to make work easier a week from now or a month from now, or it's going to continue moving your business or the company that you work for in the direction that you're supposed to go. But rather than spending time on that project, an email comes in and your reaction is to leave the project and work on the email, or the phone rings and you're reacting to the circumstances that are around you rather than acting with intention to actually focus on the task that you feel you need to work in. We can get locked into these types of cycles, which inhibit our ability to actually move ahead. So once you've brought to mind a circumstance where you're more vulnerable to falling into reaction, that right there is an excellent first step, because oftentimes we have to be mindful, we have to be aware of what's going on before we can actually change anything. So it's a matter of noticing the patterns, of noticing when we're vulnerable to get reactive, when we're vulnerable to be more emotional. So I've kind of highlighted some of the circumstances that show up for people. Things like feeling stressed, being under pressure. If you have a habit of reacting a certain way, so you know how sometimes when you're in a relationship with someone and you come out, when you're removed from the relationship, meaning that you're not in their presence, not that you're not in the relationship anymore, but you realize that you always start reverting to ways and interacting that isn't really how you react or act with anyone else. I find this, I do this most often with people that I've known for a very long time. So my brothers are a great example. I had to really relearn new ways of interacting because it was very easy to fall into our childhood ways of relating to one another. Or if I have friends that I have been friends with for a very long time, like since adolescence, those are the types of friendships that can inspire behaviors that are not necessarily common with my other relationships that I established as an adult. So when you know how you react or what your habit is in that relationship or in the situation, it provides clarity to how you need to change, because that awareness is often the first step. The other piece about moving out of reaction and moving into action is, if you notice in the moment that this is happening, just pause. So before continuing to respond in the reaction, just pause and think to yourself, is this how I want to respond? Is this the way that I want to respond? And part of that is connected to being able to regulate emotions. Because oftentimes a reaction is more emotionally recharged than an action. So if you find that there's a relationship where you're more likely to have an emotional reaction and you don't like it, you don't like how you come across in those interactions with that person, you don't necessarily like how you are in that relationship, then that is a really good place to practice stepping outside of reaction by pausing before you actually respond. Just slow the conversation down. For example, I heard somebody say this is a communication tactic. And if somebody says something to you that's rude and that would normally cause you to react in a way that maybe afterwards you weren't so proud of your reaction, one of the tricks that you can do is repeat back to them what it is that they have said to you. So, for example, if somebody says to you, perhaps somebody comes up and says something about what you're wearing, right? And it just rubs you the wrong way, because why are they even talking about that in the first place? And it feels like they're trying to get you off your game, or they're trying to, you don't really know what it is, but it doesn't feel kind and it doesn't feel loving. So they make a comment about the way you're dressed, or an offhand comment about you're late again. Oh, you're late again. Rather than reacting, and because you need time to slow down, just repeat the statement back to them. Did you just ask if I was late again? What you're doing is asking them to repeat it. And in the meantime, while they're repeating that back to you, you have an opportunity for your brain to work behind the scenes, for you to think, okay, how am I going to respond to this when they ask me the question again? And sometimes when you take somebody's comment and you say, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Did you say, how come I was late again? Then what that does is it causes that person also, when they hear their statement back, to decide if they want to readjust what it is they're saying, because they can correct the actual statement, or they can correct the emotion that's in that statement if they're being critical of you. And you have the opportunity, while you're repeating it back, to think through how you actually want to handle the situation rather than reacting in emotion. Dr. Tara Swart, who wrote the book The Source, talks about the impact that sleep deprivation has on our brain reactivity. So when you don't have enough sleep, when you're sleep deprived, you are more likely to respond from the primitive part of your brain rather than the logical part of your brain. So what that means is when you are well rested, you are better able to make decisions and you're better able to act rather than react from an emotional perspective. So when you're going to be spending time with people that you typically have a hard time not being reactive with, that's a really good opportunity to make sure that you're getting enough sleep so that you're ready to go into those relationships, into those conversations in a well-collected, balanced way, so that when you leave that, you can feel like, okay, I acted the way that I wanted to act. You see, when we're reacting, we're very much in the here and now, and we're dealing with the situation up front as it happens. Whereas when we're acting, we're being more deliberate about where do we want this to actually go. We're not just trying to recover or fix it in the moment. We're being more deliberate to plan out what it is that we want to see. And for me, when I think about it from that perspective, when I put it into that time scale of reaction is the here and now, action is for the future, what I've noticed is that when I get into the action part of things, I'm using my time better because I'm setting myself up for where I want to go. And I'm not wasting time going around in a circle. Because the reaction piece, I can get locked into that rather than moving forward in the relationship. And I noticed that with some of my kids, because sometimes in previous times, one of my kids would have the same response every time I asked them to do a specific job in the kitchen. They'd kind of fly off the handle. They'd get all worked up. They didn't want to do it. They didn't think that they should need to. And that emotional reaction that they had would cause me to respond back because I would be frustrated because I felt like I was asking them to do such a simple thing. So I would have a reaction that escalated the situation rather than de-escalated their emotional response. But it's really difficult to do that on a regular basis when you don't know what's coming. So when you can spy out those patterns or those situations where you fall into that, then you can prepare yourself before you going into those situations to be ready. Because that's the whole idea with acting, is that there's an opportunity to be intentional and prepare for what's happening. I hope that through the process of listening today, you have some thoughts percolating in your mind about areas in your life where you could be a little bit more intentional and action-driven and a little less reactionary. My recommendation, if you feel like, whoa, this is really speaking to me, I definitely fall into reacting, is to spend some time unpacking those situations where you fall into that so that you can shift out of it and move towards action. Because that is the piece where change really happens. It's not just about hearing things and thinking about things. It's actually taking the things that we're hearing and starting to implement it into our life. If you put any of this to the test, if you start finding ways to be more action-driven rather than reaction, send me a DM. I would love to hear what you're doing with it. As always, I'm so glad you're here, and it warms my heart that you would share your time listening in today. I hope this message is speaking to you. This is The Art of Plenty. My name is Amy McInnes. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. It's not supposed to replace professional help or be professional help. So if you're feeling like you need that, please reach out. There are many skilled professionals in your home community. And we will see you next time.